Hi, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to congratulate Cleyvis on the publication of her beautiful, brilliant novel. We're so lucky to have this book, and I feel honored that you asked me to speak with you. The arrival of your voice is an important day for so many of us. I cherish your book as a fellow Dominicana, as a New Yorker, as someone who loves stories about mothers and daughters, gentrification, memory, and what we do to survive. So thank you so much for your work and for your presence tonight. For those of you who already have a copy of Neruda on the Park, well done. For those of you who don't, I want to encourage you to pick it up tonight and get a signed copy. This book is an unforgettable story, and it's also a book that defies genre, I think. It's a sexy book, it's a thrilling book, it's a funny book, but it's also profound and challenging in the questions it raises about family, success, and home. So I'm excited for our conversation, and I thought that we could begin by hearing from you in your words, Cleyvis, about what this book is and how it first came to you.
Oh, thank you, Naima. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Center for Fiction for having me. I can't even tell you how many times I was sitting in the audience here, listening to writers and looking at my students. I'm like, this is gonna be you very soon. And also the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival, who has created like such a special home for all of us here. I don't know where Marsha, Melissa are, but biggest heartfelt thanks for coordinating this event, because I really wanted my lunch to happen here. So thank you for that. And Naima, oh my God, before we get started, this is gonna be a mess, guys. First of all, I want you guys to know how I met Naima, okay? So I read Halsey Street, and I find out that this beautiful woman wrote a book about gentrification, and I was like, oh no, like my book has been published. Which happens a lot when it took 15 years, okay? And I just remember, like, you did an event with Dominican writers, and I just completely fell in love with you as a person, and I hadn't read the book yet. And then I read Halsey Street and loved it, and I slid into her DMs on Instagram. And I was like, Naima, I know you don't know me, but I love this book. And she was so gracious, she didn't block me. And so after that, like, we just became Instagram friends. And when the Brooklyn Caribbean Lit Festival invited me to interview Naima for her second novel, What's Mine and Yours, I was just like floored with gratitude, because Naima is just one of the most powerful voices out here. And for any of you that have not read her books, do it. She's just an incredible thinker and an incredible writer. And I think what you are excavating excites me. And so thank you for agreeing to being here with me.
Oh, of course.
So now to your question.
Yeah.
So Neruda on the Park is a book about two women. It's about a mother, Eusebia, and her daughter, Luz. And it's about what happens when these two women, who have a very different perspective of home and the neighborhood they live in, not their park, how they confront the gentrification that arrives. A building is torn down and another building is gonna come up. And so the book is really about the two of them and what happens in the neighborhood. And it's really a story about love. It's a story about family. Well, you already told them already.
Oh, keep going. In your words, it's better.
Yeah, it's a great book. But I was really... Did I say that? It is a revelation. But this book is just, I love this book so much. I mean, I was thinking too how when I was coming up in my MFA program 20 years ago, you were supposed to be like really cool and aloof, like be chill. We play hard to get, but not me. Like, not with this book. I'm like, y'all gotta read it. It's so good. I'm proud of this book. I think it really looks at. Thank you. It's just looking at the things I care about. About corporate structures, about family structures, about friendship structures. So I'm very excited to be talking to you about it today.
Yeah. Will you read for us? Just a little bit, just a glimpse.
I'm going to read a tiny, tiny bit of this book for you guys. So all you need to know is that Eusebia is the mother, and she's talking to her best friends, who are a group of triplets, and they are referred to as the tongues in this book. How could they possibly have gotten that done so fast? One of the women asked. They discarded that old building to make room for what? The tongues asked her. Eusebia never imagined there would be this much space. I have an idea on how to stop all of this from happening, she said. The tongues looked at her curiously. What if we just scare everyone into thinking this neighborhood is really bad? She asked. The women smiled, thinking it a joke, brilliant in its simplicity. How would we do that, they asked. Eusebia could clearly see the unvoiced thought that it would be too easy to work. Eusebia spoke in a confident way, as if this conversation had already happened. She explained she meant recruiting their neighbors who would act out crimes throughout the neighborhood with other volunteers who would be the victims of these crimes. You mean fake crimes? They said. No, not fake, real. Who'd be crazy enough to move to a neighborhood amid a crime spree? What kind of crimes? They asked. Eusebia was quiet. She had come up with a list, but she knew if they participated, helped formulate this list, they'd be in. What would scare you? She asked. What would be bad enough? This is a kind of idea that can destroy a community, they said. That can save it, she corrected. The women stared at her, worried. They understood she was serious. She had moved too fast. Eusebia extended her arm around the neighborhood, lovingly sweeping all they could see. Over by the side of the park, Raul's shipping place, the cleaners owned by the Chinitos who were born in DR, the liquor store, the dentist. She wrapped her arm around herself, signaling what they couldn't see. The smell of water boiling for root vegetables, of meat sizzling in pans, laundry being folded, children being kissed, phone calls back home to people who needed help, who would be lost without the support of those who had traveled here. We can just come up with a list of things people are scared of, she said. The women exchanged looks. They spoke to each other with the simple speed of a blink, but Eusebia was in on it, an eavesdropper. Questions floated among all of them. Could it work? Was it worth trying? What else as an alternative? It was true. Fear would work. Fear always worked. I'll stop there.
Thank you for reading for us. You know, I think that our books are so kindred in so many ways, but one of the things that makes them different is, among the many things, are the characters. And you've created this very unique mother-daughter relationship between Eusebia and Luz in the book. And I remember the first time I read it, I was drawn in by the deep love that they share. You know, Eusebia's looking at Luz and she's thinking, my daughter is beautiful, and she's cooking for her, she's making pollo guisado, and she's making coffee for her. And I thought, oh, this is a story I desperately want, as a daughter who wasn't loved very well, and as a mother who aims to love deeply. But then things get complicated between them in their relationship, and there's generational differences in what they think of as success. The mother has some secrets, like some losses that she hasn't shared with her daughter, and their negotiations and their struggle to love each other over the course of the book becomes the heart of it. And I wondered if you could tell us how you developed their relationship and how it changed as you wrote the book.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's so beautiful. I feel like I'm just gonna bring you around everywhere I go.
I'll just be there and be like, ask her about her book.
Tell me again about that part. That's so great. For me, like, I always feel like relationships between mothers and daughters are just ripe for excavation. They're ripe for us to explore, and that's why I love your books, because you also explore these kind of dynamics between us. What I knew going into writing this book is that these two women love each other fiercely, and that there are silences between them. There are silences really between all of the characters in this book that define their relationship. So a lot of what is defined and the actions characters take are always rooted in like a misunderstanding or an assumption. And I thought about that as a really good place to start, like a juicy like book, because I was like, these two people like love each other, but one assumes that like her mother's just longing to go back home. She wants to get the hell out of Dodge. I mean, her dream is to live on the Upper West Side, you know, that's her dream. And her mother is not longing to go back to the Dominican Republic. Eusebia has built and made a home here, and she's fierce to protect it. So for me, just that was so exciting a place to really explore. And I think that the way the relationship changed, thanks to my wonderful editor, Chelsea, who's here. Go ahead, clap for Chelsea. She bought the book. She's the reason I'm here. The book is here in the world. But you know, I think the way the relationship changed, I think, and deepened was through a lot of the work I did with Chelsea in the final stages of editing, was to really go deeply into like each of these characters' motivations and to think about what was really truly driving them, and to not forget at any point that all their actions were rooted in love. Because things get wild and out of control. So it was good to like remember that tenderness and that love that exists, so that even when they were having like these fights and disagreements, it was still coming from a place of deep love.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the love definitely comes through, and they have such different ideas of home and different priorities, as you said. You know, one of the things I love about the book is it raises good questions about home. Like for immigrants, like where is home? Like, can you have two homes? Can you ever go back? And then for gentrification, this question of how far you would go to save your neighborhood, what you want to save about your neighborhood, what you see as worthy even when outsiders may not. Mm-hmm. And you did this interesting thing, which is that you created a fictional neighborhood for the book, but it has this like rich texture, these characters, the tongues, love the tongues, and geography. And I wanted to know what it was that you were trying to convey or explore in the neighborhood, because I never like when people say that a setting is a character. Maybe you're a setting as a character person, but whether the setting is a character or not, it's certainly vital to the book. So will you talk to us about this place?
Yeah, I love New York City. I mean, now that I live in New Jersey, my husband's sick at home. Hi, honey. And he has heard me say this all the time, like, I mean, New Jersey's great. We have a backyard, I guess. But like, there's no place like New York City. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to like create a neighborhood that combined like all of the places where I've lived. So, you know, when I first got to New York City, I was 10 years old, and we lived with my grandmother on 144th Street. So 600 is the building where Luz lives, and that's the building where I first lived. And then when we moved from there, we lived in the Bronx, and there were like some really interesting like buildings. And then, you know, I ended up spending a lot of time in Brooklyn, you know, and there's brownstones. In Harlem, of course, there's brownstones. And so what I wanted to do was create like this fictional city that would be all of New York City in it. But the caveat was that we wouldn't have all these other crazy New Yorkers running around. It had to be like only Dominicans, because part of like the legacy of Natera Park is that it used to be an African American neighborhood before it became an immigrant neighborhood, and an Afro-Dominicano. So it was very important to me to align the history of what has happened in this neighborhood and the activism that happened long ago with like the Black Dominicans that lived there, and to create a real strong link between like our lived experiences. So that was the first part of, you know, why I conceived of this place. The other thing that I wanted to do was, you know, one of the things that I love about New York City is that I think the city is very hostile. Like, I don't know if you feel that way, but like you're just walking around minding your business, you trip, and you're like, there's not even a crack on the sidewalk, like, or just, you know, the city is constantly, I think, fighting against us. And so I wanted to create like this sense of beauty that's around us all the time, but also to create an environment where nature wasn't passive. And so I wanted to do that too with the neighborhood. And so, yeah, so combining like the things that I love, and then making the setting itself unpredictable, so that like when things happen, the neighborhood becomes reflective, or when certain things happen, the trees make people trip, so it's just like a way for me, I think, to say like everything around us is alive too.
And we get glimpses of another New York, too, in parts of the book when we follow Luz to her job. And this isn't too big of a spoiler. She starts a relationship with the developer, Hunter, who's putting up fancy apartments across the street. And one of the things that I found so interesting was like this juxtaposition of like the corporate world, hustle, logic, and then the logic in the neighborhood, like the wisdom in each of the places. And they're different, but there's some overlap. And one of the things I was thinking about is the way Luz says early in the book that she's learned to turn every loss into a win. That's one of the things she's learned in like the corporate world. And I thought, ooh, like that's so, doesn't leave much room for grief or loss.
Yeah.
But then there's something similar in her neighborhood too, and with her mother, where her mother tells her at one point in the book not to cry, to put away her tears.
Yeah.
And it's something that her mother told her. And I thought, oh, this is similar to turn every loss into a win. And the book is so much about endurance and survival. And when those efforts of endurance break down and you can't anymore. And I wanted to know where that of survival in trauma and recovery, because it's one of the elements of the book that I found most profound and moving.
Thank you. I'm profound, y'all. You heard that. You heard it here first, okay?
She really is.
You heard it.
She really is. And I'll tack on a little bit because I want to hear your thoughts. I'll also say, there's a lot of conversation about trauma and fiction, like the trauma plot, right? Like, is trauma always explanatory or shorthand? Or can it be like an investigation of some of our most formative experiences and how they assert themselves over generation? Maybe you could tell what I think. But yeah, you do such elegant work in excavating what these characters are carrying and the ways they've learned to survive, ways that serve them and ways that don't. So.
Yeah, I appreciate this question so much because I think, I think there's a violence that lives in our lives. And it's a violence that requires us to cut ourselves all the time. And I worked a job in corporate America for 20 plus years. And, I was very successful. And my experience wasn't Luz's experience because I actually worked for people that like nourished me and helped me to grow. But there was still just an expectation that the work would come first. That you would be the person who, like whoever the person was who stayed the latest, who worked the hardest, climb over whoever you need to climb in order to like make it to where you want to go. And this idea of like, I'm also a project manager. I did a lot of work to become certified. And, this idea of like iterative, like implementation. And the idea around it is really that like you learn from your loss and you take it and go, like it's like you just keep going and you never stop. And, and I was implementing that, right? Like I was like, yeah, let's go, let's keep going, no pausing, like we gotta just achieve. And so as I was like climbing corporate America, I think that because I'm a writer and I was a writer the whole time I worked there, I couldn't pause but like think about that, think about this constant requirement of us that we should always be looking to win. And that we should never frame our losses as a loss. Like it should always be framed as a loss on its way to a win. And so I wanted to show in the book that. And then, the part where Eusebia says to Luz about her mom, like that happened in my life. Like I was going through this difficult time with my children. My son had to get 2 bone marrow transplants. And I remember like I had to go to Chicago. I remember during the first bone marrow transplant failed to engraft. And my husband and I had to make this really difficult decision whether to do the second one or not. And we decided to do it, because it's our child's life. My daughter was the bone marrow transplant, so it was just, the whole situation was horrible. And I just remember I was like a mess because I had to keep traveling for work. Like I was the one who had the insurance and I had to like be in Chicago very often. And I just remember like there was one trip where like I had this really important meeting and I killed it, like I was great. But I left and I was like just destroyed. Like I couldn't believe I had been so good, you know, because I hadn't told anyone at work what was going on in my life personally. Only my boss knew. And so I remember being in the airport and like just calling my mom, because anytime I'm going through a hard life or a hard time in my life, like my mom is still the person I call. And I called my mom and I was like crying and I was worried, and she was like, this is not gonna do. Stop it. Stop crying. You know? She was like, just, you have to hold it together. Like your whole family will fall apart if you fall apart. And again, like in that moment, I remember like this white lady walked by me, because I was like, if I can't cry to you, who can I cry to? And the old lady this white lady was like, you cry to me. But you know, like it was just kind of surreal, because I remember like then, you know, hanging out with my mom. And like, it was like immediate. Like I immediately was like, stop crying. You know what I mean? And it was only like after the trauma, because then after that I wasn't crying. I was like, just be tough, just get through it. And it was only really at the other end of like my son being healthy and my daughter being healthy and everybody's good, that I just realized the cost. And so for me, like I just, you know, when I was thinking about introducing this idea of, just this idea, really. It's very complicated in my mind, but I see it as something worthy of connecting in the book, that the same way that we require each other to dust it off and keep going as women, especially in our families, because everything else will fall apart if we fall apart. I think it's the same way that as workers, we're expected to turn everything that is a learning opportunity or like a true failure where you fucked up into something where like, no, it's still good. It's still good. You can spin it. So I was really interested in like, just in the book, just laying out the questions that I think we should be asking.
Yeah. Well, you definitely do it, and you don't look away from the things that the characters are carrying that weigh on them and that are really heavy. And so all of the writing is good, but when you lean into some of the tougher themes, it feels like you're writing to the fullest extent of your powers. So,
thank you.
So thank you for that. You also are very funny, Cleyvis, which I'm sure everyone here knows.
They know. Everybody here knows.
They know. But as a writer, I really admire it, because I find it difficult to write work that has a range of tones, and if I do it, I did it by accident. But your work is, it's so funny. I can tell that you're having fun. It's profound, it's deep, it's sexy, as I've mentioned. It leaves room for sorrow. And it made me wonder how you think about laughter and play in your work. I think it's one of the things that makes this book so rare, really, actually, that like it could make me feel so deeply and kind of knock me out emotionally, but then also I could laugh. Like I could laugh at Luce when she's noticing Hunter is into her, and she says, "Wepa!" Oh, Hudson, sorry, yeah, Hudson. Okay. That he's into her, and she says, "Wepa!" And there's just like, it's just so funny. So we talk about the play and laughter in your book.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think, let me just say this, and I'm going to talk to my students directly now.
Oh, yeah.
If I may. Hi. I just remember, you know, like being in graduate school and like taking myself very seriously. And like the first book that I wrote, which ended up not selling, I mean, we got very close to selling it, but it ended up not selling, was like a book about a lot of these same themes. A completely different book, but I just remember, like, anytime my characters tried to do anything funny, I was like, you stop it right now. Like, this is not a place for this, because you know what? Like, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, like, the only people that were taken seriously in literary fiction were people that were writing, like, very, like, stark, dark, serious. And even now, I would argue that literary fiction, it's, like, snobbish when it comes to, like, these differences in tone. And if there's one thing that I have gained, especially when it came to writing this book, because I just don't think this book would work without humor. Like, it is just really harrowing. Like, you have one character, Luz, who, like, loses her job, like, within a few pages of the book. And then you have Eusebia, who's, like, determined to save her neighborhood, and very quickly you realize things are gonna get out of hand. And so for me, I remember, like, at one point when I was, is PJ, are you here? I can't see where PJ is. But my agent, PJ, I remember when PJ first passed on my book, and I tell you this because sometimes you fail because you're trying very hard to write against your instincts, and sometimes you fail because you think that the only thing that's going to make your book successful is to give in to what you assume other people want. And when my agent first read this book, and he passed on it, I remember we happened to meet because we were at a conference together, and he said to me, when we met, he had already passed on the book, and we had a one-on-one, and he said to me, it's so different from you, this book. It feels flat. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, like you're so vibrant and funny and like your personality. And he was like, I just don't see that. And I was like, oh, you want to see it? I was like, oh, it's on now, because I also felt like at one point, because he had passed, and I'm not one of those people that thinks just because you're invited to resubmit, like that actually means the person's going to take it. But just sitting with him in that moment made me realize that I was still cutting myself, like I was still compromising. And, and I just remember like it was a moment of revelations for me where I was like, I just have to like go for broke with this book. Like I have to really tell it the way that I want to tell it. And if that means that I don't get awards and I don't get on lists and I don't get a good critical review, then I'm gonna have to take that risk because I'd rather put it all in there. And the other thing I'll say about that is just not just my personality, that, I love pleasure and joy. But also like, I think coming from the Caribbean and, being Dominican to me, like when I think about my family and like the horrors that we have survived, like it has always been bearable because of humor. And then I thought humor is a political action in my book. You know what I mean? Like I think that this idea that you can use humor to show how these characters actually find joy and pleasure is contrary to my human experience. And me not putting it in my book is giving into something else. And I wanted to celebrate my culture, like celebrate the way that in my family, I mean, like the funniest things that have happened to us have happened after a death. Or like, somebody just is gonna make the joke, the inappropriate joke, And so I just wanted like this book. And the other thing, this is gonna be a long night, right?
Yeah, totally.
I was just thinking about how like one of my favorite characters in the book is Cuca, who is like Eusebia's sister, Luz's aunt. But Cuca is a complicated character because Cuca, she decides to like go to the Dominican Republic to get all this plastic surgery because her husband is cheating on her. And she's determined that, like, if she fixes her body, her husband will be faithful. And, obviously, Eusebia's like, don't do that, that's terrible. And Luz is like, live your life. Do your best. Do whatever you want. Go for your bliss. And so it was interesting because I also wanted to show just, like, the complexity and the nuance of, like, one character that for one person could be a source of worry, for another person could just be, like, a source of joy. And like, how in real life, that happens all the time because none of us are flat, right? So yeah, I had a lot of fun. And when I decided to embrace joy and pleasure and humor in this book, it just, for me, like created so much opportunity to like go really deep in the parts that were dark. I think I was more courageous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you bring up Cuca because she's an amazing character. And there's this moment I remember in the book where Hudson, who Luz is dating, they're talking about body image and pressures on women. And he says, well, it's better. Like, it's better in your culture, right? Like, you can be curvier. There's not that pressure to be thin. She's like, no. It's not better. It's hard all around. And so, you write about bodies in this book so beautifully. And I think it's another way that you're maybe resisting and pushing against some mainstream or literary conventions, I think, in fiction. Like, you write about the body, you write about embodied experience, you write about pleasure, you write about women's pleasure, Black women's pleasure, you write about pain, you write about food. And I certainly think that I was taught that character is mind. Like, a character is their mind, inner life is thoughts. And in this book, your characters have thoughts and have minds, but they also have bodies and embodied experience. And so I think that it's one of the great contributions of your book, and I think it's subversive. And I don't know if you have anything to say about bodies, but
I have a lot to say.
I bet you do. I bet you do.
I think I really think it's really important for these two women, in particular, to have bodies that experience pain and pleasure. And I also think a lot about like patriarchy, and how this idea of us as women, and I think it extends beyond women. Like I think it's crazy out in the streets where like women and men, everybody's supposed to be working toward an ideal. But the point is that the ideal can never be met. It doesn't matter how thin you are. It doesn't matter how, or how voluptuous now the curvy body's in. But guess what? Like, you're still supposed to be white. You're still supposed to have straight hair. You're still supposed to have like bleached teeth, And so for me, I think that it's fascinating to consider what the preoccupation of the body means in the context of like this kind of political dynamic, but then also how, as much as like the world is trying to like tear these women down, like these women have a great deal of fun, Luz is out there falling in love for the first time. And so I'll tell you something that's so nerdy. So one of the things I did in this book is that I wanted to create like the book itself to be an artifact. And this is why it took 15 years because I was like, I wanted the book to like be reflective of itself. So like I remember like giving myself this little writing assignments all along to like get through different parts. And so I decided that the first time that we hear about Eusebia's trauma and this really painful experience she had in her past, and it takes a lot for her to get to that point where she's ready to confront it. The way that part happens is that she's having a conversation with a nurse, and the nurse is asking her all these questions, and we don't hear what Eusebia says. Like, we just hear the questions that are being asked about what kind of pain she feels. And I took like whatever it was, like 20 or 25 words. And like the challenge then was the first time Luz was having sex with Hudson, which is also the first time she's feeling love during sex. I had to use those same words. And I was like, I want, like, for the book to actually reflect itself, that like this idea of the most painful things, the only way that we're able to get past it is if we're able to turn it into pleasure. So for me, like, that moment was a subversive, intentional moment where I was saying, like, the pain that Eusebia has gone through is not in vain, because her daughter gets to use the exact same words to have a completely different experience. So yeah, it was like, for me, it was just like a puzzle. Like, nobody's ever gonna be able to tell this. Now we can. Now you'll read it and be like, what are those words? And you'll find that I had a lot of fun being like, how do you use the same word to describe pain and pleasure? And not be cheesy about it. But it's to me like this real important moment for us, I think, as writers, and a lot of people here are writers. Maybe some of the people on the Zoom are too. But I think that this idea of like, how do we take risks in our work and being willing to do it in a way that only makes sense to you, I think is also really empowering. Because I just remember doing that and pulling it off. And like, this is before I had an agent, before I had I sold a book. And I just remember like that moment where I decided I was gonna do it, and then I did it. And I was like, oh, no one can touch me. Like, even if this book never makes it out into the world, like, I did that,
Yeah. I can't tell if the lights went up. Have the lights gone up yet? Are we still good? I'm just trying to see how much time we have. I could talk to Cleyvis all night. But 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Okay, great. I'm so in awe of you.
Aww. This is going to turn into a love fest real fast. I'm so in awe of you.
I like to think that only we could write our books. Like, even if someone had a similar concept, even someone else was like, I'm going to write a novel about a crime ring to resist gentrification, like focusing on a Dominican family. I don't think anyone's going to do that because it's born so specifically of your brilliant mind. But it wouldn't be the same, right? Like, only we can write our books, and that I believe they're experiences in our lives that like equip us with insight, sensibility, passions that help us write this book. I mean, in reading this, I felt like it was such a wonderful way to come into contact with your mind and the things that make it just yours. And you've shared with us about some of your work experience, your family, but I wonder if there's something that we don't know or that we can't guess that is an experience of yours that has equipped you to give us this book. Maybe it's a reading experience, a relationship, anything that...
Yeah, I mean, that's such a hard question. Thank you for all these brilliant questions. I mean, I think if I had to pick one top one, it would be motherhood for me, because I didn't start out wanting children. I mean, I saw what my mother went through and my sisters and other women in my family, and I just didn't see it as a path that made sense for me. And it wasn't really until I met my husband, and I knew I wanted to make a life with him, and I knew that we would make a family together. Like, that's the only time when that. So becoming a mother, you know, even through all the trials, you know, I told you a little bit about my children's health crisis, but I actually find motherhood to be like a great space for personal growth for me. And as a writer, I remember there was one time when like my children were tiny, and, you know, we hadn't gone through all this medical stuff, so it was all like joy and like going to the park. And I just remember, like, you know, I was really scared to write Eusebia's character because I felt like I didn't think I could write her. And I remember, like, we were at the park and like my kids were like and there are like these geese, and like my kids are like trying to catch the geese, and one geese was like going like this, like very aggressive. Did you see that? I also got mad and out of control. And I just remember, like, anyway, like, to make a long story short, eventually like the geese leaves, but I stood up, and in that moment, I was like, I would do anything for my children, like anything.
I will fight a goose. Like,
I was like, and that goose looked angry. I mean, I think it could have taken me personally, but I don't know. Like, I think for me, it just opened up. Like, if Eusebia is the mother of this neighborhood, then of course she's gonna let things get out of control, because this love comes from this incredible place, you know? And so for me, like, I don't think and I attempted the book. I mean, I don't think that you need to be a mother to write great books. But this book, I don't think it would be what it is if I hadn't become a mother during its creation.
Thank you for that. That was beautiful.
So we're just setting up the mic in the middle of the aisle right there, and we ask that you use that so that our audience on Zoom can hear your questions. And I have a question while everyone gets over their shyness. So, Cleyvis, could you talk a little bit about Neruda and why his place in the book and why you chose him?
Yes, I'm so jealous of poets. That's reason number one. I really love Pablo Neruda and Pablo Neruda's poetry. You know, Pablo Neruda is a very polarizing character or person, or, you know, historical figure in Latin America, because it is well publicized that he was not a great person, you know? I mean, he was accused of having raped a woman. He was accused of having many prejudices. And so I was thinking about the complexities of masculinity, especially a lot of the conversations we've been having in the art world around like art and like what can we do with the artwork of like bad people, you know? And I wanted to like kind of take some of the beauty and some of the belief that Pablo Neruda had about like art being should be accessible to everyone. And for me, like, that means literally making art enjoyable. Like, it means making art that everyone can read and understand. And I think a lot of times we as a literary community are very committed in making art that like is inaccessible. And so like I really thought that was important. And I love a lot of the poetry. So if you are a Pablo Neruda fan, you'll see a lot of the poems in it, pieces of it that I really love in it. The name itself is the name of a building that is being erected in this neighborhood. That's the luxury. So the idea that like what hovers in the neighborhood is actually Pablo Neruda is the threat to the whole neighborhood. I also really loved because Pablo Neruda is a source of love for a lot of the character. He features prominently in the love story of Luz's parents and also Luz's own love story with Hudson. So I just felt like I'm gonna go all the way with this and like have fun with the poetry that I love and also talk about the complexities of a figure like that, because I think it's also a conversation we should continue to have. I saw a hand. You want to come up? It's a short walk, I promise.
So I've been familiar with Luz for a little while, but I never.
Oh, hey, Rob.
How you doing?
Rob is in my writing group, y'all.
I never made the connection until you were talking earlier, and you said Luz loses her job, and I was like, oh man, that her name is Luz. Were you aware of that, and did that matter to you, or was it irrelevant?
Yeah, I mean, also why it took 15 years. Luz means light in Spanish, so like her name Luz Guerrero actually means like warrior's light, which I think is kind of poetic. And then Luz means, loss. And a lot of what her mom and what Luz herself have to confront is this idea. So I think that's fun as a Spanish speaker. To think about how someone that speaks Spanish gets to have a different, more intimate relationship with the text versus like someone who doesn't. Everyone here's my friend. She's in my book club.
Hi.
Hey, Mira.
Hi. Cleyvis, you're my hero. I'm so inspired. And you talk a lot about motherhood and how it really impacted your writing, and it played a really big role in this book. But I'm wondering if any other characters are based off of people in your life or in your lived experience.
Oh, thank you for that question. Great questions from my friends. Yeah, I don't think so. I was inspired, by people in my life. Like, I knew that I wanted women to be really complicated because the women in my life are complicated. And I'm just so tired of, like, this trope, of, like, immigrant women as, like, subservient and, like, passive or, like, always caring. And so for me, because in my own community, that's not the story. I wanted to like be real clear that like these women are fighters. And even the woman that starts out as like the most caring person is gonna fight like hell to protect what she loves. And so, I think those are the points of inspiration. I would say though, like maybe not people, but names. Like I use Vladimir, who was like my uncle's best friend in DR, and I remember Vladimir being this dashing guy. I was like, I'm gonna put him in my book, And Eusebia, actually, back in the Dominican Republic, the lady who was named Eusebia was like so mean, And so, but when I started reading the classics in undergrad, I remember reading like Ulysses and like all of these books, and I was like, Eusebia, like I'm gonna make her this kind of hero, and so. Yeah, I think in that way, people from my life continue to inspire the way that the story shows up, but not a direct link, not in fiction.
Hi, my name is Yatna. I'm also a young Dominican writer, and I'm an immigrant. Actually, I have a similar story to yours. I came here when I was 11. And I was really excited to learn about your book, but I've noticed that there's a bit of a barrier when it comes to getting into the community of writers, especially as someone who's from the Latinx community. And I'm very present on the book communities of the internet, and I see all these other young writers who were born here, who had the resources to publish their books, and like seeing your books, both of you, it's like very, very exciting, but still, even with organizations that are specifically for helping people like us, it still feels really hard to get into the community. It still feels hard to kind of find someone to guide you, to find like the connection, because you always need a connection to get somewhere. So it's like, what will be your advice for people like me or young writers who are trying to also tell their stories and contribute to telling all the different perspectives that we live as Dominican women and writers? And we're certainly not the stereotypes that people make us out to be, right? And I just want to one day be able to also show that in the world, but it's still becoming very, very difficult.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, and congrats on writing. What do you think?
I have thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts too.
I'll start, but I want to hear what you.
Yeah.
You go.
Okay, you want me to go? Yeah. Okay, I'll start. You didn't ask me, but I'll speak to a little bit. At first, I just want to affirm that it is hard, and that it's not equally hard for all people who identify as Latinx, right? We're not a monolith. But I do want to affirm that it is hard, and I don't want to be rosy about it and be no, white supremacy, not a thing. No. It is very hard. What's been and continues to be hard. I think I have not met a writer of color at some stage of their career who does not feel affected by barriers, systemic racism, prejudice. It's ongoing. In my experience and what I've seen, I think that I have benefited greatly from the generosity of other writers who have looked out for me. And that has been true throughout my life. I think finding my people has been helpful. Sometimes those people are editors and agents. Sometimes they're other writers. Sometimes they're people who just cheer you on and believe that writing is a worthwhile way to spend your time. I think plugging into organizations and groups can be helpful, like Latinx in Publishing. I'm a mentor through Paraplus.
We're both mentors.
Yeah, we're both mentors. But something that I am constantly working on is sort of not internalizing any of the setbacks or different sort of valuations of my work, because I think sometimes there is the impulse to be what did I do? Especially as a writer who we all think about craft, what else could I be doing? And good question, but also the challenges are not a reflection of the value of the work. And I think staying connected to that can be really hard when there's rejection or low pay or whatever it is that's associated with these larger issues.
No, I love that. I think you definitely got what I was gonna say. The only thing I would add is that I think just creating a writing habit that you keep up with no matter what happens is really important. What happened to me is that I actually stopped writing for some time. And when I came back to writing, I thought a red carpet would be, because you guys see I'm fabulous. I'm of course everybody's been waiting for me to come back. And that's not what happened when I came back. I actually had lost step with the market. And I, or inspiration or what, not being part of a community, I think stagnates you. And that is especially true for us. And so what I would say is, if you can navigate Dominican writers or a lot of whoever you admire, I think figuring out where they're teaching, a lot of places now are committed to advancing opportunities for us, and I think you just have to get really good at finding the opportunities, and if you can afford it, finding the free ones. And if you are not interested in learning in an academic environment, then finding community by finding other writers. And we're lucky that right now, we have Instagram, we have other social networks where you can easily find people. But I would say just writing consistently and working on becoming a better writer is the best way to make a life as a writer, because it's the only way you can get better.
How does Spanish influence your mastery of the English language?
Why are you asking me such a hard question? That's one of my students. I think about this all the time because I feel so deeply like my loss of my language. I mean, when I speak to people, because I have an accent, everyone assumes that I speak Spanish really well, And I am fluent in Spanish. I mean, I can speak to my mom and I can speak to people and I can navigate. But I couldn't write this book in Spanish, right? And so for me, like thinking about my language and mourning my language is something that I am very aware of. And so what I try to do with English is that I try to create within the syntax of the language, like these pressure points where there's a tension in the language. And so for me, even though like if someone reads my book, sometimes people would think, oh, like some sections are really beautiful and some sections are like really awkward. And that's not because I'm an immigrant, that's actually because I'm messing with the syntax of the language. And so like the way I was trained to write was sentence by sentence. So every sentence is supposed to follow the other and connect in this kind of beautiful lyrical way, which I also think is kind of white supremacy, And so for me, like what I do, because naturally that's the way I write, but when I revise, I actually break the meter, like I break the rhythms of the sentences intentionally. And so, what I hope will happen when people enter this book is that, there's a rhythm to the book and it's an enjoyable book. So it's not like you're reading and you're like, oh, what's happening with the sentences? Like I don't think it happens like that. But there's fragments and there's other things that make you reread the sentences. And so for me, it's a way to make people feel like they're interacting with a language they're not quite mastered yet. I'm smart, y'all. Yeah. Everybody's like, "Ooh, that sounds cool," but it takes a lot of work to like do it the right way because you also want the reading experience. For me, at least, I want the reading experience to be really pleasurable. So it's something that I do, and I'm always thinking also about the way that Spanish words sound, and I try to make some English words do the things that I think that sentence would do in Spanish. So those are the ways in which I try to mourn my language in English. Hi.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Cleyvis.
Hi, Amina.
Yay. Anyway, you have to excuse me, I'm very nervous because I don't know about y'all, but I've been staying home a lot the last couple of years, and I'm not used to being around people. But anyway, my name's Amina. I got a question for both of you. When you write stories, novels, fiction, you draw from your own personal lived experience. And do you have any grounding rituals or any coping mechanism to not re-traumatize yourself when you're writing about difficult times in your life, or you're writing a plot that reflects the difficult times in your life? Thanks.
So is your question how to not do that from your personal life?
No. How do you cope with the possible... I'm basically a poet, and poets and bars go together, But it seems to me like if you're writing a novel, it's even more intense and could bring up emotions. And if your plot is related to your life experiences, do you have any advice or any practices that ground you and keep you from being re-traumatized when you're going to those places? Did I make you want to drink or something?
You did. I'm like, damn, Amina, you got me here feeling like I need a drink.
I'll stop.
No, I think that's a great question. Amina beat me in a competition for the Brooklyn Caribbean Lit Festivals. We've been friends ever since.
You are a very gracious person.
Yeah, right. I just pretend to be. I got you all fooled. I hate you. No, your story was.
Me now, right?
No, it's not true. You're a winner. Let me tell you something. I actually don't think it's possible to like not be traumatized by what we're writing. I mean, if any of us are doing half a good job as writers, telling the truth about what's happening here, like we're being haunted, we're being terrorized. I think that the fact that we keep waking up every day and going to work is a miracle. And so to think that there's any way to avoid that, I think is going into the work. I don't think it's possible. So, you know, the way that I deal with it is that I try to have a really good life that goes along with the hard writing. And I love on the people I love on. And, you know, I write the parts that are hard and I cry and then I take breaks. I mean, you know, I don't know. I just don't think you should be afraid for it to hurt. Like, I think probably when it hurts, you're doing something really good. And then I think like finding ways in which to give yourself a little bit of space and time and rest, I think is also really important. You know, I'll tell you like this quick thing. I was invited to do this event on Friday night for this alienation, and you have to like do something brand new for it. You can't like read something old. So, you know, I decided to just write about I decided first of all that I wanted to write something really funny. So I was like, you know what I haven't done in a while is write like something really humorous. So I was like, I'm gonna write something really funny. And so I just decided to write about when I first arrived in this country. I was 10 years old. We didn't have any coats. It was February. They forgot to pick us up. So we ended up stranded for like 3 hours. And I thought it was hilarious. And you know, by the end of like these like little 3 pages, I was crying. Like I had forgotten about like being separated from my father and then being separated from my mom and from my siblings. And like, that's how we lived for 8 months. And so, I don't know, I think like those of us who are in our communities, like even when you intend to write from a place of joy, there's pain in it. So, you know, I let the pain be there, but I also like exaggerated the beauty and the love that existed in that time too, you know, to let it shine through. I think that's how I do it. How do you do it?
It's a good question. I try not to let the writing be the only place that I'm sifting through hard things. Like I try to create lots of space to confront difficult experiences, but not just experiences, like questions, ideas. Like I go to therapy. You know, like I have deep friendships that are important to me. Like I do think that it's important to have multiple spaces and not to put that pressure on the writing, especially because when I'm writing, I have other considerations, like yes, at some level catharsis, but also other things that I'm trying to manage and keep track of. So try not to freight the writing process with holding all of that. You know, like the only place that I look at the unspoken is on the page. Like that hasn't been my practice. There might be a way that when I'm writing, there's like more space and more depth and more safety and an experience of mastery that I can't always have in a conversation with someone else. But I try not to make it the only space. And then the fact that writing is a recursive process is helpful too, because there are times I sit down and I'm like, yeah, not gonna do that scene today. Like, not gonna do that today. Today, I go for a walk. And then, you know, not just leaving it for another day, but like maybe the next draft, like maybe the next round of revision. But I do think that one of the things that my writing has given me and that my reading practice has given me, like reading Cleyvis's book, like there's this tremendous loss in it that we haven't named here, but like for those of you who've read it, you know. When the rest of you read it, you will know. And, you know, even reading that was difficult, but I got a lot from it. And so, for me, I think that there's great power in that experience of putting it on the page, having some experience of mastery or control when you author it, you know. And then also as a reader, to be able to engage with it, an experience of, I think, power and autonomy.
That's beautiful.
Tough.
Yeah.
Tough out there.